Hey guys, this is Brian over at Obedia, and today we're going to talk about making a dubstep style drum pattern in Korg's iMS20 app for the iPad. This is a really cool app. Gives you access to the classic Korg synth, of course, and also to an analog sequencer, and also to a drum machine, which is really cool because this allows you to essentially program an entire song from within the app. So, let's go ahead and talk real quickly about doing a dubstep drum pattern in the iMS20. Now, one thing that I should note about dubstep as we go into this is that dubstep sounds very slow. It's actually not very slow. It's typically programmed at halftime of a much faster BPM. Now, if I take a look at the song pattern section here of the iMS20 app, as I'm working in it, my sequencer is currently set to about 140 beats per minute. So that's actually pretty fast. That's faster than a lot of average dance music, and so it's programmed fast, but it sounds much slower. And so that's something that you'll want to keep in mind, because if you try to program it at a slower speed, it's probably going to sound a little weird. You kind of need the space of having a faster BPM in order to get the sound that you would be looking for out of most dubstep programming. So that's the first thing that I should mention. And the next is that when we're programming drums for dubstep, dubstep has a very distinct groove and kind of swing to it. It doesn't follow a normal, straightforward drum pattern very often. It doesn't really sound like a regular 4/4 drum pattern or anything like that. You can program it in 4/4, but you're not really going to be using a typical 4/4 pattern. So usually dubstep has, again, like I say, it has a real groove to it, and the kick will come in at the beginning of the pattern and usually not really stick around for the rest of it. So if I take a look here at the kick, which is my drum 1, right here in my iMS20 drum sequencer, I can just listen to it by playing one of these pads down here on the bottom. So it's a good noisy kick. It's got a quick attack, but it's got kind of a nice dark release on the end of it. And so I'm going to go ahead and program this kick onto the first and the fourth step of my 16-step sequencer right here. So the reason for this is that the kick will come in at the beginning, but I'm going to leave it out for the end of this pattern. Usually if there is a kick later on in a lot of dubstep drum patterns, it's going to be kind of randomly inserted somewhere within the 16 steps, but I don't really need to worry about that. So let's just listen to that and see what it sounds like. Alright, so pretty basic, right? I mean, that could be almost anything. It could turn into drum and bass, it could turn into breakbeat, it could even turn into a house beat at some point or another. Pretty simple. So where we're going to start bringing in a lot of the swing to this pattern is going to be on the snare. And so I'm going to bring the snare in near the end of the pattern, and I'm going to do it on the 9 and let's say the 15 of the step sequencer. And so what this is going to do is it's going to give me a snare hit that's going to happen in a place that I would essentially expect it to happen by regular musical timing, and then it's going to give me another hit at the end that's a bit syncopated, a bit in an unexpected kind of place, and it's going to give that swing to the pattern that I'm looking for. So let's play that back and listen to it. So you can feel the one and, you know, you can really kind of feel that groove that comes with this when you put that snare onto a little later into the pattern there. Now, I'm going to have some fun with the snare because it sounds a bit basic right now. I mean, it's hitting nicely, but I want to give it a little bit of depth. So I'm going to go into the sequence edit section here of my snare, and here I have access to a lot of different parameters that I can edit for this snare. my channel A is assigned to pitch, my channel B is my octave control, and channel C is my gate control. So I can change the channel A settings, which is a cool feature of the MS. I can set the pitch to be either chromatic or smooth. I'll just leave it at chromatic, because what I want to do is I want to give this snare a little bit of a drop on the second hit. I want it to kind of feel like the snare drops out of the mix a little bit and kind of grabs you. So I'm going to modify the pitch knob right here and just bring it down a little bit. And so what this is going to do is give me a normal snare hit at the beginning, but then when the snare finishes off, it's going to drop out a little bit and get real low and kind of dirty. So let's listen to that. So you can hear how the snare kind of just drops right there, and it grabs me and kind of brings me back to the beginning of this pattern nicely. And that's going to work really well for kind of the dark sound that I want of the dubstep pattern that I'm doing here. So I'm going to go into my sequencer again. And so now I've got two of the main elements that really give the dubstep feel to this sequence. However, I want to embellish the snare a little bit, so I have a noise sound here on drum 2. I'm going to go ahead and just add that on the same hits as the snare, and that's going to give me again some noise and embellishment to the snare hits. Let's listen to that. So it's got kind of a cool crunch to it, and now I can start programming some of the extra bits into this pattern, namely the hi-hat. So I'm going to take a look at the hi-hat, which is right down here on drum 5. I can play it back, of course, using the button. And so it's a pretty basic hi-hat. It has kind of a longer tail on it. Its release is a little longer, but I can control that using some of the different controls that are available to me in the iMS20. Again, to give it kind of a groove and a little bit of unexpectedness. So I like to program my hi-hats usually in threes. So I'll program 3 at a time, or I'll program them 3 spaces apart, things like that. That's not exactly anything that you need to adhere to as a producer, but this is something that I found that I like to do. And in dubstep, it gives me a little bit of the swing. So I'm going to do a hi-hat hit on the 3 and the 6 and the 9, and then I'll do a couple extra ones, or few here, at the end of the pattern. And so let me listen to that and see what it sounds like. Alright, so that sounds pretty good, but the hi-hat it's a little bit vanilla. It's not the sound that I'm exactly looking for. So again, I'm going to go into the sequence edit. Now you're going to notice I'm using the sequence editor a lot in the iMS20, and that's because I think that it really is a great feature for being able to get really deep into the programming of your drums and your other sounds and things like that. So what I'm going to do here is, again, I have pitch control. Now I also have octave and gate control right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have a little bit of fun with the pitch and also with the gate control of these hi-hats. So I'm just going to kind of drop the pitch a little bit, and then I'll kind of raise it in a couple different places. And this can be relatively arbitrary. It doesn't need to be anything perfect. And then I'm going to change the gate a little bit. Now, the gate is on channel C right here. The higher the gate, the more that I'm going to hear the release of that hi-hat. The lower the gate, the less I'll hear the release. It'll sound more like a quick hit. Whereas if I open up the gate a little bit, I'm going to hear all of that hi-hat coming out. So I want to kind of let that ride a little bit, open up the gate a little bit here and there. And then at the very end of this pattern, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to open the gate all the way. And that's going to let me hear the release of that hi-hat nice and long at the end of this pattern before it comes back and closes up the hi-hat sounds again with kind of a tighter gate. So I'll go ahead and make those changes, and let's play that back and see what we think. So you can really hear how that hi-hat at the end has a good long release on it. It has a little bit of a tail, and I like that sound because that is going to give me, again, a good bit of groove to the overall drum sound that I'm going for here. So I like that. I could spend a little more time on that. I could maybe change some octave settings and things like that. But I don't really need to do that. I can do that maybe later when I get into the song. So I'm going to go back. So I'm reaching about the end right now of this pattern. The thing is that I don't want to make this pattern too complex. If I overly complicate this pattern, it's not really going to work for what I want out of dubstep, which is a good, clean sound that will really drive the song, but again with a little bit of a grit to it and a lot of swing. So the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of noise. I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily add some extra noises here. Again, dubstep, much like most electronic music, will make use of some random programmed sounds and things like that, noise sounds from samples and so on, just to kind of give it a sound that is unlike what you hear in rock and roll music and things like that. So I'm just going to make use of this noise sound a little bit here and there, and that'll kind of give me, again, a little bit of groove and a sound that I wouldn't normally expect from a drum pattern. So let's play that back. So I like that. I think that it's got a good swing to it, and it's hitting pretty well. Now, one thing that I might want to do here is take a look at the effect that I'm using for these drums. Now, the global effect that I currently have set is set to a compressor, and I can fool around with that a little bit. And so let's try some different effects. So I'll give a reverb a try, and we'll play it back. That's pretty good. It's got a good dark sound to it. Let's try the second reverb and see how that sounds. I like that. It gives the drums a lot of space, and it gives them a really kind of dark, gritty, almost eerie kind of a sound with all of that extra reverb that is on them. So I think that's actually pretty cool, and I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. So now, of course, one of the biggest things about dubstep is always going to be the bass, and you want your bass to do a lot of the talking in a dubstep sequence that you're going to be working on. So I want to see how this sounds when it's against some bass. Now I've programmed a bass line here, and I'm going to go ahead and start the drums up, and let's just see how the bass sounds when it's laid over these drums, because I want to keep that swing, but I also want for the bass to really kind of shine over these drums a little bit. So let's play back and see how this sounds with the bass. So that's a really warbly bass, as you can see. That's the kind of bass that we would usually expect in a lot of dubstep. The bass does a lot of movement while the drum gives it a groove, so there's a lot of different places that I can go with this when it comes to turning this into a song and being able to really grab people with it. So I like the sound of that. I think it works really well. It's simple, it does its job, the drums are definitely groovy, and they're not overpowering in the mix. So I think that that's a pretty successful drum loop right there. We'll talk later on about how to make a dubstep style bass and get a lot of warble out of your bass sound. That's something that is definitely very important when you're programming dubstep, but today I just wanted to talk a little bit about how to program your drums. I hope that this has been useful to you guys. As always, please get in touch with me, Brian at obedia.com, or on Twitter at twitter.com/obediatutor. And until next time, take care and happy music making to you.